There are two things that are always true about Jesus. Number one, he's always looking to make people more fully alive. And number two, while Jesus himself is never one to go pick a fight with somebody else, and he's never one to punch down, he is willing to get himself into trouble to help protect somebody else who's getting picked on or pushed aside. Both of those come together in a story we're going to take a look at this coming Sunday. And I've got to be honest with you, stories like this make me fall in love with Jesus more and more all over again every time I see them. The scene begins in Luke's gospel, and Jesus is in a synagogue teaching as he often is. We've seen multiple stories of Jesus, whether it's in his hometown or other places all around Galilee, where he will be teaching the scriptures, giving his interpretation as a rabbi would, right? So Jesus is teaching, and a woman comes into the synagogue that day, just like she's there for church service, right? She's there for worship, to hear the rabbi, to pray, to be with community gathered to worship God. And she has been hunched over with a crooked back, troubled for 18 years. She comes into the room and doesn't say a word, but Jesus calls her over and says, "You are set free from your ailment." And she stands up straight. In other words, Jesus takes the initiative, heals her without asking a question or stopping to see who she is or what her backstory is, just heals her. Because again, number one rule is Jesus is about bringing people more fully to life. He does that all the time in words and actions. Here's another instance of Jesus bringing someone more fully to life. And the respectable religious people see this as an opportunity to seize on this as an attack against Jesus and to enforce their understanding of the rules, right? It's a Sabbath day, the day you gather for worship in the synagogue. And of course, the number one rule about Sabbath is the day for rest. You don't do work on the Sabbath. And they are so concerned with performing rightly in keeping with the rules. They see healing somebody on the Sabbath as work, as labor, and therefore as breaking the rule. And if this woman, they want to say, has come seeking medical help, seeking healing on the Sabbath day, then she has instigated the trouble. So they pick on her, and in the most cowardly way possible. The respectable religious people don't talk directly to her, but they use her as sort of a prompt, and they say to the crowd to shame her, "There are 6 days that we do work around here, and on the Sabbath we rest. So if you want to be healed, come on a different day, not on the Sabbath day." Instead of talking to her directly or finding out the details of the scene, they shame her by talking to everybody else. Jesus has had enough, right? Number one, if you're going to be mature, you talk to somebody face to face about your problem. You don't go advertising it to somebody else as some hypothetical third person. You don't say people are saying this or I've heard this. You just talk to the person, right? And second of all, Jesus knows this woman hasn't tried to go out of her way to make trouble. Jesus is the one who initiated and healed her, because Jesus' number one priority is bringing people more fully to life. And so he has healed her. And like I say, Jesus isn't one to pick fights or punch down, but when somebody else is being picked on, Jesus inserts himself and risks getting into trouble himself, putting himself in the place of danger to protect somebody else. So Jesus, in this moment, inserts himself into the conversation, upset and mad as all get out, and says, "Do you not get it? Do you not understand what the purpose of Sabbath is in the first place, right? Sabbath isn't God just coming up with crazy rules so that life can be more complicated for us. God isn't impressed when we take the Sabbath day of rest. Sabbath is about rest because rest helps to bring us more fully to life. And God is in the business of bringing us more fully to life, which is why Jesus is in the business of bringing more people fully to life." So Jesus tells off all these respectable religious people. He says, you all know if your animal was caught in a ditch and needed to be pulled out, if there was an emergency, you would help somebody on the Sabbath, because you know deep down that Sabbath isn't just a rule for the sake of having rules. Sabbath is a good gift that we've perverted, that we've turned into something that is just about checking things off a list or following commandments, rather than understanding God's deepest concern to bring people more fully to life. Now, the thing I love about this scene is that Clearly, Jesus could have chosen to keep his mouth shut. He could have walked away. He could have said, the respectable religious people, they're just sort of talking to everybody else in the room, or they're aiming their criticism at that lady over there. I could keep quiet, except that Jesus can't stand it when somebody else is being picked on. So he steps up. He doesn't have to beat anybody up. He doesn't have to punch anybody. There's no violence involved, but it is Jesus calling out the respectable religious people and saying, basically, if you have a problem, you have a problem with me. So instead of picking on her, you look at me. And Jesus insists this woman has been bound by the powers of evil, hunched over for 18 years. Of course, she should be set free today on the Sabbath day, the day of being set free, the day of release, the day of freedom, the day of relief. Jesus has this much deeper understanding that everything in God's commandments is about helping people to be more fully alive, helping life to spread more fully and abundantly. And when we miss that, when we misunderstand what the point of rules and commandments are, we end up turning them into something oppressive and ossifying, like a fossil or like a skeleton, rather than something that is alive and breathing. It is so easy for us 20 centuries later to take rules and to turn them into the be-all, end-all, rather than to see God's commandments are always about bringing people more fully to life, and they need to have the breathing space so that sometimes, we stretch, sometimes they bend, sometimes they are changed, right? There's times where Jesus says this rule that was in place for centuries before was there for a time, and now something new is happening, right? Gentiles are included in the community of Jesus. The food rules are set aside. Sabbath is changed. Jesus has this way of saying the rules were always meant to bring people more fully to life. They were not an end in and of themselves. You and I, if we're going to be followers of Jesus, are called in that same kind of work. One, to help people be more fully alive. And second of all, you and I might be called to put ourselves in between the danger and someone else who's picking on someone. You and I might be called to step up and speak up, rather than keeping our heads down, rather than I don't want to deal with this, rather than I don't want to be controversial. Jesus knows it is controversial. He's going to stir up trouble, not only by healing, but by inserting himself into the conversation to help protect this woman who's been picked on. Jesus is willing to do it because that's sometimes what it looks like to bring people more fully to life. You and I might be called to speak up. You and I might be called to risk getting into trouble for the sake of bringing people more fully to life. And I have a hunch, as we do that, following Jesus, we'll find ourselves made more fully alive. Join us for that conversation as we dig into this story from Luke's Gospel this coming Sunday. See you then.